Please take a moment to like and subscribe. This way I can continue to bring you these great stories. Also hit the notification button so that you will not miss any episodes. Take a moment to tell me where you are from and what you like about the stories. Chapter 3. Many new ideas. A million things whirled through his mind as William sat thinking. The mare plodded steadily and calmly toward home. Instead of just a small forge to shape and weld wrought iron with money provided annually by his lordship, he could move ahead with his plans for a water wheel to power a blast furnace and a tilt hammer. He would be able to cast iron. Rather than build slowly, he would immediately be able to hire some labor and build a larger shop like his father's wheelwright shop. William could barely contain his excitement as he dreamed of new possibilities. He was going to learn to read and write and start a much larger business than he had ever dreamed. With extra hands, he would be able to contract larger jobs and go after work at the shipyards in Bristol. William's father owned a forge and wheelwright shop. He made top-grade transport wagons for merchants and the military. The shop was successful for many years, but when William turned 11, his father suddenly died of a fever, and his mother passed only a fortnight later. Somehow the title for his father's land and business had ended up in the hands of his father's attorney. Cheated off his inheritance, poor William ended up an apprentice in his father's own shop. He was forced to live in the back of the shop and obey the commands of a new owner. He was treated no better than a servant. When William turned 18, he left with the only inheritance he could take, his father's personal tool chest, an old anvil, and hand tools. It took a minute for William to realize the mare had stopped and that he was home. He took off her bridle, pitched some hay into her feed net, patted her rump, and closed the shed door. The shed was nothing more than a small lean-to near the bakery's oven house. After securing the mare, he went upstairs to his pretty young wife and new son. Tired as he was, he took the stairs 2 at a time. William slowed down and opened the door, trying not to explode with his grand news. He saw his Jessica sitting in the chair in front of the fireplace feeding the baby, and all thoughts of his day went out of his head. William kissed her on the cheek, and she pulled him down for another kiss on her lips. He knelt next to her on the braided rug, took her hand, and watched with wonder. He asked, "How are you? Are you feeling all right? Should you be up so soon?" "I'm fine," said Jessica, and handed William his son. He took the small bundle in his large, strong hands and marveled at how small his tiny fingers were. His son blinked and made faces and started to cry. Jessica took the baby and put him back to her breast to feed again, and he stopped crying. Jessica began to tell William about what the baby had done and the terrible odors his new son could make. The baker's wife sent her daughter Millie with a nice bowl of lamb stew for Jessica's lunch, along with some fresh bread. Jessica offered, "There is a bowl of stew on the stove for your dinner. You'll have to look after yourself a bit for the next few evenings. Millie will meet you in the morning with something for your breakfast and a bundle for your lunch. If you get uppity, you'll have to hire someone for your afternoon tea." She laughed. Her words and the clink of coins in his pocket as he rose brought back the remembrance of his day. "What did you do today?" Jessica asked in a quiet voice. William turned away from her and investigated the fire and said, "Oh, not too much. I cut the first tree." Not looking at Jessica helped to keep his excitement under control. "Is that all? One tree? What were you doing daydreaming about your water wheel?" "No, but I did get distracted for a while when a little girl came floating down the river and I had to jump in and save her from drowning." "James William Timble, are you joking with me? You did no such thing." "Yes, I did such a thing, and it completely changed our lives," said William. "Now I know you're lying." Jessica exclaimed, "William, sit down, look at me, and tell me what you're on about. And quit teasing me." William pulled the straight-back chair up near his wife and set about telling her of pulling Lord BraitheWaite's daughter from the river and the fantastic reward. Jessica sat mouth open, listened, and gawked when William handed her the 5 gold sovereigns, the first ever owned during their marriage. The first thing she said was, "William, when you learn, will you teach me?" "Of course, and he too when I can," William said, gesturing toward the sleeping baby. "We are also to have access to the books in the Manor's library, and there are hundreds of books. I was there," William exclaimed. "I've never seen so many books in one place. They must have cost a fortune." and his lordship said he would provide a tutor for me to teach reading, writing, and sums. I'll be an educated man. I will become a gentleman of books as well as becoming a more competent tradesman. It will give me opportunities I could have never hoped for not knowing how to read. William and Jessica sat looking at each other, neither saying anything, for several minutes. There was a knock on the door, and in came Millie, the baker's 15-year-old daughter, with fresh cloth for diapers. She dropped her bundle, curtsied, blushed at William, and scuttled back out the door, never saying a word. "William Timble, I do believe you have an admirer," Jessica said with a laugh. She was quite the chatterbox today. She was in and out all day with news and instructions from downstairs. I felt sorry for the poor girl running up and down all day, but she seemed to enjoy seeing the baby. She kept asking when you'd be home. She must have been watching for the mare so she could bring up the cloth I asked for after you came home. William wisely said nothing at all and went to eat his supper. Soon they were all in bed, young James William in his new crib made by his father's hands, and William and Jessica in their bed close by. William was exhausted and fell to sleep when his head hit the pillow. Jessica lay awake for another hour thinking over the last 2 days and how drastically their lives had changed in such a short time. The next morning, William was up at dawn and down the stairs to speak with the baker's wife. He asked her to arrange for a girl to attend to the house, while Jessica was still in her child's bed, and handed her a few copper coins. For a short time he had considered purchasing one of the slaves from the Dutchman who brought blacks from Africa. Instead, the baker's wife said she knew just the girl, the daughter of one of the local families. She could come each day to do the washing and set lunch and tea for his wife, and then prepare the supper meal for the family. William knew he would have little time to spare if he was to finish the smithy and keep the business on course during the day and learn to read and do sums in the evenings. £5 a year was a glorious amount of money, and William wished to be able to invest it wisely. William would not spend his lordship's gold when he could provide his family with a good income from his labors. He would invest in tools and the waterwheel so he could have a blast furnace and tilt hammer. He decided he would visit Lord BraitheWaite and ask his advice on where to find the components he would need. He dreamed most nights about his father's shop and his childhood playing on the wagons as they were constructed. He woke with a clear picture of the fine business he would build with his new advantage. Lord BraitheWaite was as good as his word, and within a fortnight found a tutor for William 3 nights a week. The tutor spent 2 hours each of these evenings teaching William to read and write, and his lordship's personal accounts clerk taught his sums. William practiced his lessons on the walls of his newly finished smithy. He completed his new smithy in excellent time, with additional help in the form of a hired carpenter and assistant. He would pay their wages with a small portion of the gold received from Lord BraitheWaite. William repeated each lesson with Jessica, knew and understood everything William was learning. Soon she was helping him understand some of the things he was reading. She had a sharp, quick intelligence and was better at memorizing. He took advantage of the privilege of borrowing books from the Lord's large library, taking home a volume to read. This was quite an honor, as books were rare and extremely expensive. William and Jessica enjoyed reading aloud to each other, and both worked on pronunciation. William's tutor tried to school him from his common speech. Jessica laughed out loud when William told her of his tutor's prune-like face and the way it contorted in a grimace when William pronounced certain words. He would sit and read during his lunch break on a bench he made for just this purpose. He placed the bench strategically under the shade of a large oak tree, where he leans back against its huge trunk. He would take the book from the saddle, unwrap it from its clean cloth cover only after he washed his hands in the creek so as not to soil it. He had no desire to lose the privilege of borrowing these valuable books and the knowledge they held. Lord BraitheWaite honored his promise of work. After seeing the abilities of this talented smith performing work on his farm, he introduced William to other merchants and tradesmen in the village and in Bristol. William began to do specialty work for the tradesmen of the village when it became known he had a talent for tool making. The special steels he produced in his blast furnace were harder, and this allowed the tools he made to take and keep a better edge and last longer under the hammer. His water wheel and power transmission system of pulleys powered the bellows and the tilt hammer. He designed a power lift system which allowed the casting and handling of bigger projects. William asked Lord BraitheWaite to help him find additional books on steel production. It was from a Spanish book that William took the design of his new blast furnace. With the help of the local priest and his tutor, they translated the description and drawings. The Spanish of Toledo were famous for their steel weapons, and William wanted the ability to produce high-quality steel, so he sought out the knowledge. The book had been smuggled out of Spain and cost William dearly. The steel he could now produce would pay him back with a handsome profit. William was soon able to produce high-quality castings, and the business began to thrive. The work seemed to be more and more maritime in nature, so William read all he could find about shipbuilding and the tools required. While in discussion with Lord BraitheWaite, he was able to find a market for the steel-reinforced block and tackle system with the power lift system he had designed for his own use. He was introduced to a friend of Lord BraitheWaite's, who was visiting the manor the same evening as one of William's visits to the library. The gentleman complained he was finding standard rigging inadequate for the new ship he was building. William opened his little leather-covered book where he kept design sketches and notes. After showing the gentleman his designs, they were soon shaking hands over in agreement. Lord BraitheWaite and his friend retired to brandy and cigars, while William returned to his books. Lord BraitheWaite, his friend, and several others had formed a stock company to fund a massive gunship to put to sea as a privateer. His lordship's friend had been fortunate enough to obtain a royal letter of marque, allowing him to plunder Spanish vessels that were bringing the wealth of the New World back to Spain. It was a huge risk, but great personal wealth was possible for the investors, so the shares sold quickly, and construction began at Lord BraitheWaite's reputable yard in Bristol. William's new knowledge of the shipwright trade grew each day he spent with the designers and carpenters. He was spending more and more time in Bristol. Chapter 4. William saves a slave boy. William was on his way home after spending the day buying and loading a wagon of iron. He thought longingly of his chair and a glass of beer in front of his fireplace. He knew that it would be some time yet before he could take off his boots for the day. William had to drive the wagon back to the shop from Bristol before heading home. William was walking through the market back to the livery to get the horses. He would have to lead the horses back across the square and hitch them to the loaded wagon. He was roused from his thoughts by cries from a young boy being whipped by a man. The man had a cane pole and was flailing a small Oriental boy. "You're a worthless lump of dog meat. I don't know why I ever purchased you. I'd sell you for 3 shillings rather than feed you again," he said angrily, with spittle spewing from his mouth. He raised his arm again to strike the unlucky lad. William grabbed and held his arm and said, "Here's your 3 shillings and I'll take the lad." The man sputtered a denial and tried to wriggle free, but seeing William's determined face and muscled arms said, "All right then, and welcome you are to this worthless beggar's brat." William looked at the child's dirty face and asked, "Are you hurt, bad child?" The child shook his head. "Can you understand me?" The child nodded and looked up into William's eyes for the first time. For some reason, this gave William a strange feeling in his stomach. He experienced a similar feeling when standing in front of Lord BraitheWaite for the first time. It was not quite the same, but he knew in an instant that he had done the right thing to save this child from a life of slavery. William had it in his mind that he would free the boy and see he learned a trade. Even if the boy was small, he looked wiry and strong, just needed feeding up a bit, as Mrs. Stockton, the baker's wife, would say. He would turn the boy over to Mrs. Stockton to clean up and outfit with some new clothes before he introduced him into their home. All this passed through his mind in the blink of an eye as if he'd been planning it for days. It felt strange, but right somehow. William was brought back to reality. He looked down at the small boy walking next to him, carrying a knobby, an old shaft of bamboo, and a small bundle of what seemed to be ragged clothes. William wondered if the child required the crutch to walk. He didn't seem to limp. He let the question drop as they arrived at the livery, and he settled the bill. He turned to attend the horses, and there was the boy talking and petting the horses as if they were old friends. They were always skittish around people they didn't know, and yet here was this little Oriental boy talking to them in what William guessed to be Chinese, and they seemed to be listening. The boy took the reins and led the horses from the barn and into the street as if he'd done it every day of his life. Within minutes, William, with the boy's unexpected help, haltered the horses, set the pins into the wagon load of goods, and they were on their way back to the shop. Along the way, he asked the child if he was hungry. He watched as the boy fell on the rest of William's raisins, cheese, and bread like a starving wolf. The boy looked up at William with a small smile as he pushed the food into his mouth. They were next to the shop in what felt to William to be a short time. William, again with the boy's help, made short work setting the wagon alongside the shop. Unhitching the team and settling them to stable with a feed net for them to munch and fresh water from the stream took half the normal time. Finally, William pulled the boy up behind him on the mare and set off for home